Welcome to Unsilent with your hosts Dave and Brian. This is not another current events podcast. We're digging deeper, diagnosing, and discussing what's really going on today, how we got here, and providing observations for future generations.
Welcome to Unsilent. We're Brian and Dave. We're hoping you'll let us know where you think we got it right and where you think we completely, utterly missed the point, which you can do by visiting unsilentpodcast.com. So let's get into it. What are you thinking about this time, Brian?
Well, I'd like to talk about something that I don't know that looking back in hindsight that will be all that apparent. It might be, I don't know. All of our leaders are in their 80s, I think. It seems like we don't have anyone who has a significant rank in federal government for sure that is under 76. I mean, and I'm not exaggerating. Like, as we're recording this now in October or November now, 2023, we've had leaders on camera freeze up and just appear to have mini strokes.
Yeah.
We have leaders who are just kind of seeming impaired. The president can't seem to walk up and down stairs. He can't seem to. Meanwhile, they're still in charge. So what's up with that, Dave?
Well, yeah, it is. And when you say in charge, I think you sort of got to do air quotes around that because
that's a fair point.
The cognitive sharpness of these folks. Well, and it really becomes apparent when you listen to their speeches, whether any of the folks that we're talking about 20 or 30 or 40 years ago, you listen to their speeches back then and you're like, wow, this is somebody who's got a command of the language, even though, maybe I didn't agree with them. They still had a command of the language. But today it seems like they're struggling to get through things, especially if there's no teleprompter to give them the cues that they're supposed to take. And so it really is a strange thing. I think a lot of it is because we have such an entrenched system, an entrenched party system in this country, that those that know how to navigate that system, those that are in control of that system, have been in control for such a long time that it's very difficult for a younger person, maybe with fresh ideas and more energy, et cetera, to break in and rise through the ranks. It's a very long bureaucratic slog to get to any place. You get younger people elected to Congress, to the lower house, the House of Representatives. And sometimes, not that many younger folks are in the Senate, but to get to a leadership position in the Senate, a leadership position at the presidential level takes just such a long time. And, there's also been one of the things that occurs to me, too, is there's a lot of disbelief in our current structure. In other words, I heard just yesterday, and as of this moment, November 2023, the approval rating of the House of Representatives of Congress, actually I think it's Congress overall, is 13%.
Right.
13%. So, why don't we have new leadership in our political class? Because 87% of the people believe the whole thing's messed up. And so it's kind of hard to attract a young idealistic person to that structure, I think.
Yeah. And to be fair, I mean, we have people who are in their 30s in Congress, and I'm not suggesting that literally every single one. What I am suggesting is people who have the ability, Mitch McConnell, for example, at this moment, like it or not fair, has the ability to decide who gets to even run and be supported because of the funds that he controls. So if a 32-year-old came along and he didn't like them, they wouldn't have a shot. So I'm not suggesting people don't get elected. That's not what I mean. So for those of you listening, what are you talking about? Of course there's young people. I mean in senior leadership roles. And I want to go back to something you said in the very beginning. I don't want to derail the whole conversation, but I want to go back to something you said, because it kind of, I always kind of have these thoughts well, is it worse if this, or is it worse if that? And you talked about how these people are they seemingly impaired, and so they're not running things, probably. So my question is it worse if they are running things and they are impaired and they're running things? Or is it worse if we elect these people, but because they can't do things, they have other people running the show that we can't see? And it's a sincere question for you, Dave.
Yeah, yeah.
Which of those would be worse in your mind?
Well, I think if they were actually running things in the short term, it probably would be worse because they would be, like,
Yeah.
well, where is this country, or who is this leader, or where's Roosevelt when I need him, or whatever.
Right.
In the long term, it would probably be better because then we would have people that are actually more cognitively competent
Yeah.
in charge. So, but sometimes you have to go through
And I
some
think
short-term pain.
that's an element of why people, what there's two reasons that they won't give up control. One is they don't, or they won't, there's reasons they won't, two reasons they won't get out of the office. One is they won't give up control, and two is we're not pushing them out. Right.
Right, right,
Um, Part of the reason we're not pushing them out is because for some people, I'm guessing, it does feel like it really doesn't matter who has the office because they're not the ones running the show anyway.
right,
And who wants to stand there and catch tomatoes being thrown at you when things are not really in your control?
right,
We've all heard stories by now of people who are very idealistic and they get elected and they go to Washington, DC, and two and, 2.5 months later, they're like, "What the hell is this all about? Like, I can't get anything." They don't want to hear my ideas. They're
right.
everything they do is to squash people like me.
Yeah, yeah,
And so the combination of that and this mountain you would have to climb to get elected and get and to pacify the people who have the purse strings, the senior leadership in the parties and all that kind of
right.
stuff. That doesn't sound attractive to anyone.
Well,
So
no.
we end up with these old people, right?
Well, that's exactly it. I mean, I think if you pile all those things up, there've been people. Not that I have any aspirations or even would, but there's people that asked me to run for things in the past, and
Yeah.
and my response has always been, I'd probably end up in a month or two pushing a pencil through my eye into my brain because it's
Right.
so mind-numbingly bureaucratic and impossible to actually get anything of any substance done. And especially right now, I mean, very simple things you can't get done. And so from a person who's got, if a person has a not even a hyper idealistic agenda, but an agenda that says, I want to make things better for America. Well, maybe we should pass a bill that does that, but you can't oftentimes pass a bill because you have to pass an omnibus bill that has everything from a bridge to nowhere in Alaska to, money for cleaning pigs' feet in Iowa. You can't get anything done. And so why would the people that have the best ideas and the most energy want to participate in a system like that?
This is an interesting point. Like this is, and I agree with you that when people have mentioned me, like, why don't you run for office? My answer is, I'm not electable. I'm not because
Well, that too.
not because I'm a bad person, but because I would want to get stuff done, and we're not in the mode right now of getting stuff done.
That's right.
We're in the mode of not getting stuff done, and so I would not be an electable kind of person. And to illustrate what I'm talking about is like this: what you're talking about with passing bills, like single topic bills, or
Right.
like I don't understand why we can't do that, except for if we did do that, which I think the vast majority of us would say it would be awesome to have one topic, one bill, one vote.
Right.
And if it takes 50% longer for them to vote, who cares?
Right.
We want to know where they stand on things. The problem is that nobody would be electable at that point because everyone would have a reason not to vote for them. And so it's kind of a catch-22, it feels like to me. Does it feel like that to you, or you think I'm exaggerating
100%.
that?
No, 100%. That's 100% right. Because, even stuff that you can get a significant portion of people to agree with you on, probably will be hard to pass because of the loud vocal fringes will essentially scuttle you. I mean, so this one is a little bit time based, but there is currently in the Congress, in the House of the United States, one person who doesn't like you can, on the Republican side, can make a motion to vacate the speaker's chair, the third most powerful position in the United States. So president dies, then the vice president dies, then the Speaker of the House becomes the president.
Right.
That person could have any member of Congress push for or any member of their party, rather, the Republican Party, push to vacate them, and they're out. So you make anybody mad about anything. So you have to go along to get along. You can't do anything too dramatic or too substantial, because you'll just get thrown out. So the whole, and this is what I mean by when I say the system. The system is so bureaucratic, so intensely. I don't believe in conspiracy theories and such. I don't think there's a shadowy, conspiracy out there running things.
Yeah.
But I do believe that there's a massive, monstrous bureaucracy. If you want to call it the swamp, call it the swamp. If you want to call it the deep state, I don't care what you call it.
Right.
But it's an out there in the open, massive bureaucratic state. You put a good person with good intentions. You mentioned this. In a congressional position, and then they have to go through all of the trainings and the orientations and know who's really, this is the person you really want to, all the cronyism, the whole thing.
Yep.
And a person that's like, I want to go because I want to make a difference for my country, and in some very basic ways. These are the things that I believe. And that person is going to be either chewed up by the system in a lot of cases, or they're going to be so far out there that it's just their anger runs them through, and they survive on anger. But this is not a way to govern a country. This is not a way to run the most powerful country that's ever been conceived in the history of humanity. And so it's got to change. It's going to change. It's got to change.
It will change. And this is one of the things that I'm glad that Kenny G will not have to experience probably in his lifetime. Kenny G being a guy born around the year 2040 in Generation Gamma is now what it's being called.
Right.
That's why we call him Kenny G. But you're right. I think this is going to be one of those things that has to get resolved. And there's kind of two pieces. One, I have personal experience in, because I wrote legislation that became a law on the state level, not the federal level, but I had to go through the whole process of understanding how the system works, and even just at a state level, which is infinitely easier than the federal level.
Right.
It was clear right out of the gate that out of the 100 or 200 or whatever, 100 or something people, I think, in the state that ended up passing the bill that we wrote, it really only mattered what a handful of them thought.
Sure. Yep.
The vast majority would do what they were told by the people in charge of the committees, or the purse strings, or both. In many cases, people who'd been around for a while, who had the relationships, who had the funding, because it's catch-22. We complain about this stuff, but you can't solve any problems if you can't get elected. Okay, so that's like a base thing. Like, and every person who goes there believes that they have great ideas. So let's assume that I'm a guy who goes there and I have great ideas, and knowing that 48% of the population is going to hate everything I do. Okay, fine. But I think I can solve problems. I'm going to go there and get elected. I can't do anything if I don't get elected. Right. So I have to do the things that it takes to get elected, which includes appeasing the people who have the purse strings, making the right relationships with the people in the political system. So that's one element of it. Is there's a hierarchy and a seniority and who has the ability to get fundraising done.
Yep.
If you can't meet their needs in a way that gets them on your team, you're out. Yep. So that's one side of it. And then the other side of it is the bureaucracy that you're talking about. And you and I talked about this before, where an entity, an organization, doesn't matter what kind it is, will get to a point where all that matters is self-preservation and growth.
That's right.
And that's becomes the paramount function of the entity. And again, it doesn't matter if it's a nonprofit organization for helping homeless people, if it's Walmart, it doesn't matter what it is. The CCP in China, it doesn't matter. Every entity, every organization will get to a size where the paramount function becomes self-preservation and expansion. And so on the bureaucratic side, we have situations undoubtedly where the person elected has a chief of staff or some kind of administrative assistant or whatever. And at the state level, they might have a couple of those. At the federal level, they might have 5 or 6 layers deep. Right. And the people in the top 2 or 3 positions of the admin staff are not really doing anything. They're delegating everything. And pretty soon you have 9 people doing what used to be one elected person's job, who had a I know you're supposed to say this anymore, but had a secretary. That was it.
Yeah. Well, and that's also why you find that a lot of the people that vote on bills don't really know what's in them, because they've got legislative staff that are doing all of the writing of everything that's in it. There were famously, I think it was Nancy Pelosi, who said, well, we have to pass it before we read to see what's in it, read it to see what's in it.
Right.
So, when you've got a system that is so completely bureaucratized that the people that are in charge are really only in charge from a sort of a broad strategic level, and all of the individual, what actually matters on a day-to-day implementation is not even known by those people, then you have a dysfunctional system. And that is and that's also why other people can't get elected or can't make a difference, because they don't have all of these levers, all these little minutia of gears that need to be turned to get something done. They have to be, when somebody gets to Washington, D.C., they have to be conditioned and inculcated to know all the little things. And maybe in 10 years, you'll know enough of the little things to author your own bill or something,
Yeah. Well, I never saw this personally, but I heard stories while I was heavily involved in that legislative process of even worse than what you're describing, where the legislator would not know what's on the bill to vote on. They would ask their staff. I heard stories of legislators leaving the hall to vote and going out and asking the lobbyists, am I voting for this or against this? And then getting their answer and going back in.
Yes.
Now, I never saw that. I don't have any firsthand experience with it, but I heard enough stories about that to think that there's some truth to it of some sort. And that was just mine again. And I'm talking like states, small stuff. But if it's happening there, it's happening at the federal level.
Yeah.
And that's what we've talked about before. Like, these companies and these entities and whatever ETF funds and whatever, like they have such power and that the politicians are disengaged. And so it kind of does feel like, I don't have any way to prove this or substantiate what I'm going to say, but it does kind of feel like you go there and you have your dreams, you find out you can't do it, you sell your soul to the devil, and you say, well, I might as well just sit here and get rich.
Right. Well, yeah. And that is one of the best ways to get rich is to be elected to office. And then it's a career path to either better office,
write it out,
or to the media, or, ultimately to the media. Here's one of the ways I think about this, Brian. The late night comics on TV that we think are so funny, or, well, a lot of times I don't think they're funny. I think
they used to be.
But they used to be. But the late night comics that are on TV, the jokes that they tell, they're not their jokes. They're jokes that are written for them. The speeches that people give, and this has been the case for a very long time, are speeches in the most part that are written by their speechwriters, and they are the deliverers of the speech. Now, so Reagan had one of the guys that I like to listen to is one of Reagan's speechwriters, because he had great ideas, very articulate, et cetera. And there was, there's nothing nefarious there at all. But, Reagan would tell him, as an example, here's what I want to communicate. And then he would put into place the words, et cetera, to do that. So in a lot of cases today, though, I think what we have is we've got people that are either media personalities or want to be media personalities that are in these positions, in these elected positions in government. This sounds very cynical, but hey, this is what I think it is.
Yeah.
They're elected positions in government. They've got staffs that tell them what to do they still have free will, et cetera. So they're not puppets, but they have staff to tell them what to do. And they've got lobbyists that are funding whatever they want funded, that are telling them what to do. And they are then the front person to go out and be the presenter of whatever it is the people that they've chosen to align themselves tell them what to do. So a lot of it is the people who have what is the choice of the elected person? Who you're aligning yourself with. So, because they're still going to tell you what to do. So, infamously, we've heard recently that our current president, Biden, look him up if you're Kenny G, has come out with cards, and those cards tell him which reporter he can call on and which one he can't call on. Oh, I'm not supposed to call on you. Now, he's not supposed to say that out loud, but he still says it out loud. And the public looks at that. I look at that and say, I'm not interested in being a puppet for lobbyists. And be a lobbyist. Is one of the, in fact, the lobbyist is one of the only constitutionally protected positions in our founding documents. So,
Yeah.
so I'm not against, lobbyists, but lobbyists with too much money, too much influence, the bureaucracy that says no, this thing you want to do, you can't do that because of subparagraph B number 2, which was, and then of course the lawyers that are involved in that as well. The law was supposed to be something that we could understand as citizens, but as I look at the law these days, and as I talk to lawyers these days, I'm like, what in the heck? I'm doing a real estate thing. And I said, well, this makes sense to me. He says, well, that might make sense to you, but the Fifth Circuit said blah, 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 blah.
Yeah.
So so why do we have only old people? They're the only ones that will have been around long enough to know how the system works and who have the control to some extent of the levers of power. And those of us that would like to see something positive done would just be too frustrated to do it. And we know it. And so we're not going there.
Yeah, it's interesting. Like, so when you talk about Reagan telling his speechwriters what he wanted to communicate, and they would help him wordsmithing.
Yes,
that makes perfect sense. What happens now, though, is they test talking points, and they come back and tell the politician, "Here's what the public wants to hear you say."
Right.
And frankly, that's not leadership. That's the opposite of leadership, which is part of what gets us down this path of the fourth turning and these things falling apart. And that's why all the institutions are crumbling, is because somewhere along the way, I would argue, late 80s, early 90s, halfway through the saculum of the fourth turning, the 80-year cycle, look it up if you're not sure what we're talking about. Things start, that pivot happens. And now we're responding to what people want to hear instead of making decisions that, even though that their right might be unpopular. And then one of the things that also with this has happened, and I'm sure this happens again every cycle, every one of these, like we're in the, what would you call it a few episodes ago, like this is the Third America. There was the first one when we were founded,
the Third Republic. We're in the Third Republic.
Yeah.
The Fourth Republic is on its way.
Yeah. So one of the things that we've seen specifically in the Third Republic, I don't know about the other two, honestly, but I know is happening in this one, is the founding fathers did a great job of keeping people's power in check.
Yes.
They have great checks and balance system. What they didn't anticipate, and what is causing problems, I think, is they didn't have a way to force people to meet their obligations.
Right.
So Congress has delegated a tremendous amount of their authority and frankly ability, I would say, to bureaucracies.
Yep.
And to the presidency. And so it's not what it was intended to be.
Exactly.
And so for a young person to have to come in and undo that is going to be exceptionally hard, way harder than it would to be a guy elected in, when was Biden elected? Like 72 to the Senate or something like that?
1872. 1872.
That's right.
Sorry.
Somewhere in the 1970s, he was elected. His path in politics is immensely easier than it would be for an AOC coming in now, or somebody young who has to undo all this crap that his generation did, and the I can't think of the right word, but delegating their authority, giving it away, and not not maintaining their obligation and responsibility. And that is part of what's created this big bureaucratic monster that's going to have to be undone because it's not sustainable.
Well, and that's exactly right. And the reality of it, to connect this to our fourth turning concept, is that what has become a leviathan of bureaucratic insanity that nobody can really understand. 70,000 pages of tax code, et cetera. All of this stuff that's been done, the takeover of the bureau of the administrative state versus the legislative state, all of that has to be undone, just from a human nature and from a history perspective and from a previous saculums. It's not going to be undone incrementally. It's been created incrementally. It's been created step by step by step. We need another law. We need another law. We need another law. There's a book I've got sitting on my desk from the 90s, Philip K. Howard, The Death of Common Sense, and the subtitle of the book is How Law is Strangling America. And this was like 30, 25 years ago, something like that. And he talks about this growth of at that time. I mean, that was a long time ago. He talks about that. It's much more applicable today. So I think if we look at it in terms of how can this change? So here's the problem. Yep. Here's the problem. We got ancient people with Leviathan systems that can't do. It can't be undone incrementally. And so probably what's going to happen in this crisis era that we're in is it will all probably change in a very, very, very compacted period of time when whatever the crisis we're facing now is, whether it's war, revolution, or financial collapse, whatever it happens to be, the Fourth American Republic will be then refounded again on with a more manageable, probably more strict, probably more streamlined kind of governmental system.
Efficient for sure.
Efficient. Now, whether it's good or not, who knows? We don't know. We don't know if it's going to work out well.
I think that's something that you and I need to be really, really clear about in our conversations on this podcast for people listening is when we talk about the rebirth, there's no guarantees it's a fantastic rebirth from our perspective.
Right.
Now, it could be a totally communistic country, and Kenny G's listening going, heck yeah, that's the way it should be. You two dopes were the ones that I'm sorry, I'm a dope, Dave's not. I keep forgetting that. You two guys don't understand that this is the way it's supposed to be. Communist, you're capitalistic, greedy, selfish, blah, blah, blah.
Yeah.
Thank God you guys are gone. And that might be true from his perspective. From ours, though, the rebirth doesn't promise that there's no promise that it'll be the same.
Right.
We will have the same forms of freedoms we've grown accustomed to. That's for sure.
Yeah. Well, and that's exactly right. It could be that. It could be autocratic. I mean, human history has a majority of the governance in human history has been autocratic, kings and emperors, et cetera. It could be a free country like we are now. But we don't know. And and I'm glad you pointed that out, because the one thing we know is it's going to change, there will be some societal there'll be some societal sameness that will happen, whatever that sameness is. And the sameness can be the sameness of the government gun saying you will do this, and the sameness might be everybody agreeing, but it will be everybody going in the same direction, just like they have in a variety of different times throughout history. So we'll see.
And when it happens, again, kind of along the lines of the age of the people calling the shots now, and how all that applies to the fourth turning, it will fall to what we call Gen X.
Yes.
To step in, and we will have to be the ones who kind of undo all this. Crummy stuff that baby boomers and whatever have done over this period. If you look back in around the Civil War, Ulysses S. Grant came along. He was the 7th general or something like that. 9th general. I can't remember how many it came before him. And Lincoln famously said, these generals they're basically saying that they're soft. And they're like, if I give them 1 million troops, they say they need 2 million. Like, there's always a reason they can't do the thing. Right. And then Grant comes along and just starts kicking ass and taking names. Right.
Yep.
And then, there's a whole period where he was, not looked upon very favorably and whatever. And then in World War II, is guys like Patton, who came in and just took charge. And this is the pattern were the people who were the more abstract thinkers and more I guess religious or spiritual. We have the spiritual awakening in the 60s, but they're not good at the nuts and bolts of stuff.
Right.
And then that stuff begins to deteriorate. And then folks who are good at nuts and bolts stuff, which is Gen Xers, we come along and we have to snap all this stuff back into place. That seems like a very unattractive task. So I get why we are reluctant to take the reins. My question for you, Dave, is why are the people who are at this age reluctant to give up control? I mean, you've had a good run if you're in your 80s and you've made multi-millions of dollars in your position. What more is there to gain? I can't believe that they believe, like Mitch McConnell. I'll just tell you who I'm thinking about. Like, I can't believe he wakes up in the morning and goes, "Thank God I'm here because these young These young people who are only in their late 60s couldn't get this shit figured out. Thank goodness I'm here to show them the way.
Well, I will tell you, I was thinking about this a while back because somebody who is even much older than Mitch McConnell, who had been there since the dawn of time, Dianne Feinstein, in the other party, just passed away. And, she was in a wheelchair. She was not healthy for the last part of her life.
She was out.
She just wasn't there. So I did some thinking about this. I'm like, so why does somebody like that stay there? Because, well, two reasons. One, inertia, because that's what she's been doing for the last 60 years or something like that. And their entire self-worth, I think it comes down to this. Their entire self-worth is tied up in their power, in their position, in their prestige, in their fame. So Mitch McConnell, there's been things that he's done that I've liked and things that he's done that I haven't liked. But the man knows how to run the Senate. He knows the ins and outs of the system. Now he pauses every now and then and sort of vacates his mind for a little period of time.
Pauses.
His brain he just takes a waking nap for a few minutes. And so, like sorry for that struggle, Mitch. But the reality is, if he weren't doing what he's doing, then his entire self-identity vanishes. It vanishes because this is what he's been doing for a very long time. He's one of the most powerful people in the world. Even if he does take a pause, he's still one of the most powerful. Biden's, why doesn't Biden, he's got money, he's got, name recognition, prestige. Why doesn't he just stop? Why does he want to run for another term? Because this is who he is. I see, you and I should revisit this question in, say, about 40 years when we're both really old and say, have we decided that at this point in our lives, our value to, and getting people to listen to us is less important? I hope I do, but maybe not.
Well, I can. What I do for a living is help business owners figure out how to exit their business. Right. That's part of what I do. That's not entirely what I do. That's part of what I do for a living. And I can tell you that one of the scariest things for men, more than women for sure, is thinking about retirement. Now, I will tell you, when I was my first real job, I was in the Teamsters Union, and I was in the steel industry, and my first day on the job, I had kind of a union orientation, a Teamster orientation. And I learned two things that day that really stuck with me. One was, at that time in 1994, the Teamsters had enough money in their pension fund to pay the national debt, which at that time was $9 trillion. Okay. And the second thing I learned explained the first thing. The second thing I learned was the average lifespan of a man after he retired from the Teamsters was 17 months. And so we don't talk about this stuff, but men know this, and women look forward to. I'm generalizing, so I know that there's exceptions. Blah blah blah. Women look forward to spending time with their grandkids and like that family stuff, and men fear death, right? So there's no question that that's the thing. And I can tell you from my perspective, working with people who they do have to transition. At some point, you have to sell your business, and one of the things that we do fear is
exactly
what is my identity going to be? Like this is all like you said, like this is my identity. This is what I'm known as. I'm the guy who had the car wash company or whatever for 40 years. If I don't have that, what will I be? And they don't have an answer for that. They don't want to step into uncertainty. We know that people don't like to step into uncertainty. So for some of them, they write books and they go on book speaking tours, and those people transition out easier, or they become lobbyists, or they go run a economic empire in Wall Street. Those people seem to transition out. The ones who can't do that, either by ability or personality, or I don't know, they get stuck because they have nowhere to go. And then the second thing is what you talked about also, their self-worth. So different than their identity is their self-worth. And again, I think that my perspective is, it's kind of like the saying, those who can do, those who can't teach. Those who can leave the Congress and go do other productive things where they make even more money probably and amass even more power probably. And I'm not in love with that either. But the ones who can't do that, just they're stuck. Like, where's Mitch McConnell going to go? He's not going to go run a company in Wall Street. He's not going to go on a book speaking tour.
I think power, we've talked about this before. Power is addictive. And even if you're, I don't think Mitch McConnell's a bad guy, but I think he probably, He probably enjoys the fact that he's one of the most recognized people in the country and in the world. And, and it would be hard to give that up. I understand, even the people that you're talking to that are retiring, when you're in business, lots of people know your name and they look to you for advice. And I've worked with folks. In fact, and I'm not going to mention his name because maybe somebody knows him, but I remember a guy who was a salesman and he sold these things, and it was the 90s. And the guy, I perceived him, I was in my 20s and 30s, but I perceived him to be ancient. And he said things, his analogies I could not identify with because I didn't understand his jokes. I didn't like his comb over hair, all this stuff. But I felt sorry for I felt sorry for the guy. I honestly felt sorry for him because he didn't realize that he wasn't quite relevant anymore. And he didn't know his time had passed.
He didn't realize
and
his
so,
time had passed.
When my kids became old enough, I said, look, personally for me, because I can identify, I feel everything we're talking about. I feel the whole thing, because I like what I do. This is not a personal, help podcast, but well,
I'll tell you when you get that old, Dave. Don't worry, you're not there yet. I mean,
well, that's also what I told my kids. I made my kids promise.
Yet.
I said, look, I don't intend to stop working because I like what I do. I like how it makes me feel, etc. But I said, you got to tell me when I become that guy, and then I promise that I will listen.
You have to comb over the bad jokes. Don't worry.
Well, I just shaved it off. There's no need for comb over. I just shaved it all off. So it's all. So, but
no,
it's
that all makes
it's a real thing. When you're at the.
I guess last week we were talking about the difference in movies and things like that in the 1940s, 1950s. There was a tremendous sense of obligation and duty, and that outweighed my personal benefits of things. And I think that's part of what I lament, and I would want to explain to Kenny G is I'm sure that again he's going to have a similar perspective on things that he's lamenting as they're slipping away. One of the things for me in this moment in time, and for many people that would agree with the things that Dave and I say is that one of the things that's going away that is hard and not great is this sense of duty and obligation and responsibility in favor of doing things that make me feel good and make me feel powerful. And again, many of these things come down to just being selfish. And listen, I'm not saying all selfishness is bad. There's plenty of things that are selfish that are like self-preservation is a selfish tendency. That is a good one. That's okay. But when these things are so far out of whack now where it's not even a consideration to look around and go, the entire effing country is falling apart.
Yeah.
Maybe some of us should get out of the way who are in wheelchairs and let some of the younger folks come in and do the things that need to be done. And there's just not, I don't feel that there's a perception that that's even on the table or necessary.
I think if you would ask folks like Mitch McConnell or some of these the octogenarians that run things, or the people in their 70s that run things, I think they would probably their retort to what we're saying would be, well, we don't see anybody stepping up that's got any skills. We see people stepping up. So both of the major political parties are dominated by fringes that are just angry. And anger is not leadership. Anger is, so when we were attacked at Pearl Harbor, FDR came on and said, this is a day that will live in infamy. And he talked about the shared grief and the shared anger, but he didn't get up and scream and yell like, again, both sides of the aisle do. Well,
he was in a wheelchair, Dave. He couldn't get up.
I suppose I just, what I ableisted him or whatever you call that. I'm anti-ableist. But you see his response. There would be no more justified response in December 8th, 1941 than being angry. But he didn't do that. He came across more settled, more calm, more resolute. And I would suggest that the ancient people that run things now look at the folks that want to change things, and they don't see resolute Prince folks that want to push things out. Some of the people that, and if they do, then oftentimes they retire and become university presidents or something else. They just they're not going to stick with it. So I think that's probably another reason why a lot of them stick around.
Yeah, I think that all the things that you've talked about are all valid points, and some are more I accept and acknowledge, and I understand more than others. At the end of the day, though, we're stuck in this mess with these people
Yes. Yep.
who are thwarting the people who are coming up.
Yes.
Because whatever reason, they don't like their breath, or they don't like their haircut, or whatever, and they're making it so that they can't get elected.
Yep.
Simultaneously, they're complaining that nobody else is really taking. Nobody's serious is coming along.
Yep.
Basically, nobody's doing what I would want to, what I would want them to do. So therefore, I can't relinquish control. And oh, by the way, what I do with myself if I gave up all this control. And oh, by the way, I'm one of the top 10 most powerful people on the planet. Like, why would I give that up? It's just all these things compound, and what we are left with is a group of people who have deferred their responsibility in many cases. They've abdicated all their duties to unelected bureaucrats. And meanwhile, that bureaucratic system is just growing and growing and making it ever more difficult and not fun to just endure.
Right, exactly.
and they're great idealists, but they're not great tacticians. They're not great with nuts and bolts stuff. And eventually, this is not sustainable. And we've seen this over and over again. And it's one of the things that just, from my perspective, we all complain about it, and it feels like it will be this way until it just can't be this way anymore. There's many things you and I talk about that kind of fall in this bucket of things that we're just, it's not ideal. We know it sucks. And the alternative is still worse, because that would mean that guys like me and you would have to go do things that we don't want to do. And so, it really sucks that these guys are blowing it, but I can still hang out in my backyard and go do what I want to do on my weekends. And someday that won't be, it'll be so bad that we will have no choice but to start fixing things.
And that's how my conclusion is that's how it's going to change. And we will know, because we won't be able to ignore it anymore. We won't be able to say, well, somebody will fix it. I think we'll also know because somebody will emerge. If I go back in biblical history, Moses emerged when everything had to change. So a Moses will come along at the same time that things get so bad that it's all going to collapse anyway. And when that happens, and I mean that in a kind of a societal sense, so that's how it's all going to change. It's not going to change incrementally. It will change suddenly. And it will change due to unbearable crisis and personal sacrifice and all that kind of stuff.
And I think that's what was attractive about Trump. And for Kenny G listening, like, Trump will either be the worst president, he'll be ranked the worst president ever, or like number 2 next to whoever comes after. It'll be one or the other. It'll be very polar, I'm sure of that. But one of the things that was attractive about him is the same thing like with Lincoln and Ulysses S. Grant. Lincoln said, he's a womanizer. He's an alcoholic. But you know what? He fights. And that's what we need, is somebody who fights. And that's what Trump did. Again, whether you like him or not, that's not relevant to this. If you think he's the worst person ever, that's fine. What was exciting about him for the people who got behind him or are still behind him as of this moment, there's still a significant number of people who are hoping he wins, is he fights. He is the opposite of these things. He is a guy who will come in and get things done. And he proved, actually, in his first term that he's not likable like these old people are that are there. He's not the relationship guy. He comes across prickly, there's no question, but he got things done in a tactical nuts and bolts way that arguably were pretty solid things. And so half the country-ish was ready for that, and half the country-ish is not ready for that. And forget the left and right part for a minute. Just half the country is ready to acknowledge that we were closer to needing to get this stuff fixed than we were comfortable saying. And the other half is like, we're not quite there yet.
When we get to the point where I think probably in January of 42, FDR, even though he was very far left, he was very well liked by basically everybody because of the crisis that came. So what we'll find, I think, when this all comes to a head and when all this does begin to change and when there are sweeping changes, I hope I like them. I might not. We'll see. When all these sweeping changes do start to happen in response to an existential crisis, existential threat, then we'll find people getting behind whoever and whatever the new program is en masse, even if they were previously opposed to it. So that's the only, and that is really the only way that this can change. It cannot change incrementally. It cannot change law by law, election by election. If just my one guy gets elected, it's all going to be fine. It can't change that way because the mass is just too big. The mass of inertia and dysfunction, and we can only put up folks that are 90 years old to run. All of that will go away in that way. That's what's going to happen.
Yeah. Well, history has shown us it always comes down to one issue. I don't think you and I have any idea what that one issue is going to be, but it always comes down to one issue. It always gets to the point where we feel like we get motivated because we feel like there's an existential threat to our country. That's a term that's thrown around a lot right now. I don't mean like what we've been doing the last few years. Trump getting elected was not an existential threat in my opinion. Biden getting elected was not an existential threat, even though that's what people will say. A true, legitimate, like our country will no longer exist if this thing happens. That is such a cataclysmic thing that we get, and people have to step up because the 107-year-old people can't do it, and younger people have to. And then we had no choice but to get behind them. And then what do you know? Magically, a bunch of really important, significant things happen really, really fast because we don't have a choice. That's how history's unfolded so far. So it's going to be a wild ride.
It will be. It will be. And I hope we come out well on the other side.
Yeah. So for those listening, again, go to unsilentpodcast.com. If you think we didn't get a piece of this right, meaning if we're not explaining to Kenny G what this moment feels like, if we're not explaining what it feels like for you to have these old people around, if you're like, hey, you guys are crazy, there's not old people around, AOC is really in charge of the whole thing, fine. Tell us that stuff. We want to explain to Kenny G what this moment is like, specifically related in this episode to the kind of people who are in charge, who Dave and I are saying, like the people ultimately in charge are quite old, and what that's like. So anyhow, unsilentpodcast.com is where you can do that, or check out our Rumble channel. A great place to do that. Comment would be on the comment section of this video that comes out. And until next time, this is Dave and Brian signing off.
See you next week.
Do you want to be unsilent? Make your voice heard on our social media channels and share where you think we got it right or wrong. Go to unsilentpodcast.com for social links so you can join the discussion.